he drives over 200 miles. He's in tactical gear. Mm-hmm. He has a camera on his head where he's streaming the shootings live. He shoots 4 people in the parking lot before he even gets inside of the grocery store, and shoots the security guard that and because the security guard, from what I understand, news reports have said open fire when
exchanged fire with him or something like that. Yeah,
and he killed him. And the reason that when they exchanged fire, the young man did not die was because he had a whole bunch of armor on, right? So it just brings into question. A lot of things. But my thing is that the hunting of Black people for sport, because you were streaming this on a gaming. You're streaming this on a I think it was called Twitch, I think is the name. It's a gaming platform.
Yep.
So
let's embark on the Ark Republic to hear current news that's published. More than gossip and chatter, covering current affairs that matter. We talk issues with professional views, all keeping you in queue. We wanted a higher vibe for these days and times, to free the voices and minds, reporting the sign of the times, so all can build, let's shine, yeah.
What up, wherever you are in the universe? My name is Kaya Nyambi Shivers, and welcome to Ark Republic. And we're talking to one of my favorite guest contributors, this other sister who holds it down. How you doing, Dr. Sherice J. Nelson?
I'm doing good, girl. I mean, I'm a little grievous, right? Today is the day after this shooting in Buffalo, and I have some folks that I'm connected to up there. And
really?
So, yes, I do. And so today's been kind of heavy, just thinking about how, as my husband says, a Black man couldn't pinch 10 white people and still be alive.
Right. And so I think it's now 11. I read this morning that 11 Black people have died, 2 white people have died. The teenager who was identified, let me pull up his name, but it's a white teenager who traveled to Buffalo.
Over 200 miles.
Yes, who traveled to Buffalo and apparently went into the Blackest zip code in Buffalo. If you know anything about Buffalo, Buffalo is not necessarily, it's predominantly white city, but there are pockets of Black, historically Black African-American cities. I mean, we're talking about from emancipation. This is where a lot of, Black folk went to in order to establish themselves. I want to say Harriet Tubman lived in Buffalo for a minute.
She did, before she moved into Canada for a short period. Yes, she did. She lived there for a short period before she went into Canada. And yes, the neighborhood that he went into is 80% Black.
Wow.
Yeah. The neighborhood that he went into is 80% Black. I know the mayor in the city of Buffalo, and so he's a like civil rights activist pastor out of the state of New York. Reverend Foy, and so I've appeared on his show, and so that's how I got to know a lot of the people in the state, and then especially in Buffalo who come on. I'm connected with them on Facebook. There's a few people that I reached out to, like, are y'all okay? Like I said, I know the mayor in Buffalo and the police chief in the city of Buffalo.
So Sherice, what is the mood? What are the Black folks saying in Buffalo?
I mean, they're livid. And they're livid really because and they don't want to sound negative, but they're upset because he's still alive. Buffalo has had many incidents with the police and police brutality, especially in the last year, really since pandemic. And so many of them are they're very grievous. Many of them are still in shock. Right. One of the people that I am connected with on Facebook, I reached out to her and she had to put out a message I'm getting so many phone calls, but we are okay. She lived close to the neighborhood. One of her good friends was actually interviewed by the news because she had just pulled into the parking lot. And her girls were going in there to get ice cream. And she saw the chaos and just pulled back out of the parking lot. She didn't know what was necessarily going on, but she saw chaos and people running, and she pulled out of the parking lot. And so there's lots of anger. I would say there's lots of anger But there's also a lot of grief, right? There's a lot of grief because the state of New York has just really gone through it when it comes to the pandemic. And you know this, right? You're a professor at NYU, so you understand what it means, for what it was like in the city. But a lot of folks felt like they were, that the suffering that happened throughout the state had then been kind of like forgotten about, but people were suffering. And now it's like another wave of suffering with not many answers, if that makes sense. And so there's frustration, there's anger, and then they're just in shock and in grief.
Well, you raised several key points. In the pandemic, a lot of the focus was on New York City, and less of the focus were in these pockets in the northern part of the state that actually had very high pandemic numbers. So we're talking about in areas such as Buffalo, in vulnerable communities and communities of color. And there's also
Albany as well.
And
right?
Oh yes, in Albany, yes, and Albany as well. And so in me reading in terms of what happened in the response of the police and the dissatisfaction of the community is communities such as those in Buffalo often bear the brunt of a post Black Lives Matter hostile terrain for Black communities that we often don't really factor into the conversations of what happened when movements fail. I don't know if I want to say Black Lives Matter, but or there's all of these, allegations and those who are identified as the leaders now are put under, in my opinion, deserve scrutiny in terms of how actually they helped in the movement and what they did with the resources that they collected. But I wanted to bring that up. But for those who are unaware, yesterday, a white 18-year-old person, okay, excuse me, I think I said 11. I think right here, the AP News says 10, but where did I read that he said 11 Black people died?
Well, so it's been vacillating reports because they have not released names.
Okay.
So we know that the total is 13.
Okay.
We just don't know. We just don't know the number of 10 or 11. So the number is vacillated between how many people have perished versus how many people were just injured. But at the last count that I saw last night before I went to bed, it was a total of 13. And then there was discrepancies about if 10 had perished or 11 had perished.
Okay.
But and then if there were 2 wounded or 3 wounded. But the total number of 13 has stood, if that makes any sense. But they have not released names of the victims. And so that is why there's some discrepancies about how many people have actually perished.
Okay, because AP News is saying 10 Black people died, but another news report from another agency said that 11 Black people died. So I'm glad you mentioned that. But just to give more insight or context to this massacre, 18-year-old Payton Gendron, I don't know if I'm saying his name. He travels to Buffalo. He goes to a supermarket and he basically begins to shoot.
Well, no, let's tell the story like it is. He drives over 200 miles. He's in tactical gear. Mm-hmm. He has a camera on his head where he's streaming the shootings live. He shoots 4 people in the parking lot before he even gets inside of the grocery store, and shoots the security guard that and because the security guard, from what I understand, news reports have said open fire when they exchanged
fire with him or something like that. Yeah,
and he killed him. And the reason that when they exchanged fire, the young man did not die was because he had a whole bunch of armor on, right? And so it just brings into question. A lot of things. But my thing is that the hunting of Black people for sport, because you were streaming this on a gaming. You're streaming this on I think it was called Twitch, I think is the name. It's a gaming platform.
Yep, so live Twitch broadcast.
Right. So you were, and what I will give Twitch credit for, and other people that are in the gaming world, I'm not one of those people, said that Twitch immediately shut the that
the broadcast down.
they immediately shut the broadcast down. I think they shut it down like after he left the parking lot. So no one saw from what we understand, and people that I know that are heavily in that gaming world said, it happened so quickly that many people didn't even think it was real, if that makes any sense.
Right.
Because it got shut down so fast. So what I do want to say is, and this, as a political scientist, I'm always thinking about this. This is why we need more regulation around around these social media sites and these streaming sites. This is why we need some more legislation, because I truly believe that these companies need to be held liable for these types of broadcasts. But I will again say that, I do applaud Twitch for at least having somebody actively monitoring the site about what's being posted, because they were able to snatch it fairly quickly. Because think about it this way: if I've driven into a parking lot, I hop out and then start shooting people in the parking lot, that's 90 seconds to, it doesn't take he had I think they said he had over 100 rounds. So if I was able to shoot 4 people before I even get into the store, we're talking about a maximum span of 3 minutes. So the fact that they were able to pull be able to pull the stream that quickly speaks to the fact that they were that somebody with eyes, not just an algorithm, was actively monitoring what was being streamed.
Well, I think that I just want to respond in terms of you calling for more regulation for social media platforms. I would say I'm a media scholar, and I think that's the rabbit hole goes a lot deeper than just social media. Because being in media has made a whole cash cow of disseminating dead Black bodies, right? That has been the cash cow of the media since, I would say, Trayvon Martin, and then there were also things in between. But putting dead bodies as headlines and now streaming them and streaming assaults and everything like that, it's a whole conversation that needs to be had, which is something I pointed out years ago. It's highly problematic because it desensitizes the public about violence, until that violence happens to them. And I think this is this guy, this murderer, right? This assassin is a result of a lot of things, right? But it's part and parcel of, having this idea to stream in live this massacre that is happening and doing it on a platform that generates views, right? So I would say so, but that's something that we could discuss later. Excuse me. But what I do want to emphasize is the conversation about. I don't know how to say this, and I know you will probably have another take. Is that I don't know if this Black Lives Matter movement we had was necessarily effective, and also the repercussions that we are now facing. We talked about this right before the elections. Get ready. It is about to be very real. And this is what we're talking about. And then there was this thing back in the day. I remember even Oprah Winfrey saying it, this whole idea that when the Jim Crow racists die, then all will be well. But if, as we know, baby's kids don't die, they multiply. So we're even seeing, it's like we're turning the clock back to the 1950s and 60s, where you have this very emboldened, bold acts of racial terror by white people. And when it is not checked the way that we have seen, this is going to continue.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Arc Republic. If you like what you see and you like what you hear, you can actually keep this mothership going. How? You can make a tax-deductible donation in several ways. One, Cash App us at Arc Republic Media. And you can also go on our website, arcrepublic.com/donate. As well, you can also donate to our fiscal sponsor and our sister organization at Black Farmers Index, that is Cash App, or also go onto their website, blackfarmersindex.com. We are 2 Black women-owned media organizations who share our profits so folk can thrive.
But so this is, I think, a perfect segue into his manifesto.
And the 180-page manifesto, yes.
right, where he's directly speaking about replacement theory.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And to me,
Explain what replacement theory is, because I don't think everybody knows.
Absolutely. So replacement theory, and this is why I think it hops right into Roe v. Wade, right? This is to me the connection, this idea of this replacement theory. The replacement theory is the idea that if white folks don't start upping their numbers of reproduction, that they are going to be replaced primarily by Black people. Now, some of that from the face of that is just false, because we know that here in this country that Hispanics are duplicating faster than Blacks anyway. So that this idea that they're going to be replaced by Black people is hilarious to me, because if we're just talking about pure population, Hispanics have us beat. So that's number one. But number two, the replacement theory is also talking about the centrality of culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that the replacement is not just about the physical replacement of white people, but the replacement of white culture. And that I also find to be laughable, because Black people have always determined what was cool in this country. Black people have always set the culture. And how do we know that? Because Black women were cooking in white women's kitchens. So this whole idea, right, from a cultural perspective or from a physical perspective, that this whole idea of replacement is just laughable to me all the way around, because we, number one, are not reproducing at the same rate as Hispanics that are in the country. And number two, we've always dictated American culture, and that's never going to change. And so to me, this replacement theory and the proliferation of it, to me, is just false on its face.
And so it's this replacement theory. Actually, a student of mine talked about it. We talked about this in depth. I remember he was talking about it, and I said, well, young man, for me, the replacement theory has shaky foundation. When what can you replace? You always were the numerical minority in the world. White people are the numerical minority. I mean, depending how you define what racial lines are, and that's the fudging of racial identity that has happened over decades. It's like, who is Black, who is white, and all this in citizenship. But even though in the United States, this Hispanic, and that's an ethnic, right? That's an ethnic identity, not a racial identity, because there's a whole bunch of Black Mexicans now coming up from Oaxaca and Veracruz, claiming they're African in their Black or their Blackness. But also, however, this report came out a couple of years ago that indeed African people are populating, people of African descent in Africa, on the continent, and those in the diaspora are numerically having more babies than anybody else in the world. And that is true.
No, you're exactly from a world perspective. But right. If you read in the manifesto, I didn't read all of it. I was not going to read 180 pages. But he's specifically talking about the United States. Like that's right. And that's you are absolutely right. White people have always been the statistical minority throughout the world, and Black people are everywhere in the world. They're in Asia. They're on every continent in the world, and they are having more babies than anybody else in the world. But the idea that that's what's happening directly here in this country, the numbers don't necessarily bear that out. So that's what I was saying.
Right. No, I know exactly. No, I totally.
Yeah. I was like, huh? Like this is, I guess my thing was, the whole thing was illiterate. Like it wasn't logical in its tie together. The same way this whole Roe v. Wade stuff is not logical. It's kind of like someone who cherry picks from pieces to then justify the hatred that they have.
But this is connected to, but you know what this is connected to? This is connected to when Europe was losing control of the colonies throughout the Americas, right? And the Caribbean. And they implemented, and this also is what happened. I would say the United States and Canada were the most effective in terms of taking millions of Europeans and transporting them to the Americas in order to whiten the populations, simultaneously having these waves of genocide that are going on, right? And so it didn't work. It's not going to work, because even though numerically, right, even though they're citing Black in the manifesto is particularly about this white black binary. That's why I say racial identity is really obscure in the United States, because people say Latino is not a race; it's an ethnic identity. It has nothing to do with your racial identification. But what you're talking about is that those who are basing this white extinction on replacement theory are starting from the point of having to transport white people to the country, or they weren't even white then, transport Europeans, then change them to white in the country in order to do so. It is I mean, now that we look at it, we're like, this is kind of insane, right? Right. From the gate.
But to me, that's where that to me is where the connection of Roe v. Wade is, though.
Okay.
Because Roe v. Wade is all about trying to maintain the statistical majority inside the United States.
Right. No, I totally agree. I totally agree. And it's done in many, and it's done in many ways. I want to distinguish what was going on in Buffalo in terms of, we could wrap it up and then we'll go directly into Roe v. Wade, because that has a lot of other tentacles that we need to talk about and address. But specifically, what we're talking about in Buffalo, it's not even a concern. This is not going to be the last time, right?
No,
I don't know if we're going to call this we can't call it the Rittenhouse effect, because Rittenhouse actually shot white people, but this mass targeting of Black folk in particular, but people of color in general, this is not going to be the last of it. And what do you see as the consequences of what's going to happen?
Well, so this is something else that I want people to think about at this juncture as well, right? We know that white people were shot and possibly perished as well. And people didn't like when I said this about Joe Manchin and Joe Biden, but we have to also think about then they didn't like when I said this. Yeah. Well, I said, they were talking about civil rights and we were having a discussion about it, and I said Joe Manchin has never forgiven Joe Biden for being Barack Obama's second.
Right.
And to me, that's paralleled here, right? That this white male saw the white folks that were living with Black folks just as bad as Black folks.
Right.
He did not, his level of, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, he's a total John Brown. Brown. Mm-hmm.
Right. His level of hate didn't then slow down and be like, oh, you're one of me. Right. So I'm not going to shoot you, if that makes any sense. No, if you're willing to live with them, if you're willing to grocery shop with them, because again, that's why I think distinguishing that the neighborhood that he went to is 80% Black. So if you're going to that grocery store, you have made a decision to live with Black people, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason I said that is I think that's where we're going, is that we are in a place right now in this country where it is going to be make a choice. And we're going to see reverberating effects on what make a choice means, right? And make a choice means if you're on the side of even sympathizing, not even empathizing, but sympathizing with Black people, then you might as well be Black. And then there is going to be violent consequences for it. And if we are not careful, in 2024, we could see the end of democracy because of it. And what do I mean by that is that Trump's folks were sloppy, right, in 2020. And many say it was a dress rehearsal for 2024. And so to me, what we are seeing is a repeat of history of how the tensions flared in the country right before the Civil War, that resulted then in the collapse of the Southern economy, right? And so what I see us on, the trajectory I see us on, the place that I see us going to, is back to a place of high racial tension where more and more violence is going to become necessary. And
unavoidable, or inevitable, I should say. Everything is avoidable. It's inevitable. We're going to talk more about that, because for me, there are these, let's say pre-George Floyd, there are always it was very specific in terms of identifying some of the issues in terms of why particularly Black men are dying or Black males are dying. Now we have all of these different, incidents you have of dying, or like there's just another take on mass incarceration. These are things that we really need to talk about, because I know you've been hearing about how all of these people who are tied to rappers or in the hip hop world are these mass arrests that are going on in Atlanta, are going on in New York, in Los Angeles. I mean, and so when we're talking about population shifts, how this plays in the long run, and also knowing that law enforcement officers, they're not all wrong, but they're not all right, and how this is going to be very interesting, and how we're looking at what's going on, right? But I know I'm talking around it because we could talk more about it, but I want to have more stats in front of me so I can make like a clearer kind of argument and like really connect the dots. But I wanted to acknowledge that. But I want to say I do offer the Black community of Buffalo, or the community of Buffalo that is suffering and grieving. I do offer sympathies from ARC Republic, and I it has all even caused the fatigue, because now, like, here I am, I'm in Philadelphia, and it's just like another headline, right? And so that also is a point of concern, is that it doesn't become a real problem until it hits your door. And when it hits your door, it might be too late, right? Or, so that is the concern. We are so tired, and it's not just of the violence, but it's just everything that has been thrown at us. Just wondering what does that look in order for us to restore, renew, and really activate ourselves to move forward and really be tackling some very serious issues.